4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's looking live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, it's another day. Another half dozen or so major news stories.
Major.
You know, it's Gish Gallop, which you think I made up.
You made that up. Totally made that up.
It's just this gallop of events, which makes it impossible for anyone to follow. But that's why we're here, Sam, because we follow it. And we bring it home to our audience, and we put it in the broadest possible perspective, while at the same time making it compelling and easy to follow. As we say, getting it down to where the goats can get it.
And we hang out and chill.
Yeah.
All right, Dad. So let's just, if you haven't been keeping up, let's just describe what's happened over the last few hours. So at midnight on April 9th, the reciprocal tariffs went into effect. Before that, a week before that, he had announced them. The stock market was tanking.
And the stock market tanked at record levels after he actually imposed the tariffs.
Right. But then, not even 24 hours later, I'm not even sure, maybe around, I don't know exactly, 12 hours later.
Yeah, some short period later, less than a
Trump
day.
announced on Truth Social that he is pausing all reciprocal tariffs for 90 days. The stock market explodes, goes up like 1,000 points or something like
2,500 points.
But then today it crashed again. So we're in total tariff turmoil right now. Now the big debate that everybody's having, I don't know if anybody's having it, but this is what the Trump people want you to think. Trump people want you to think, MAGA people want you to think that this was all part of the plan, that this is the art of the deal, that president is playing 4D chess. The other side of the aisle says he has no clue what he's doing. This is total chaos. He's doing it based off of fear and anger, et cetera, et cetera. Is this the art of the deal, Dad, or is this total chaos?
There's never been an art of the deal.
Oh.
Name one Trump deal that benefited anyone but Trump. You can't come up with it, can you?
I can't, no.
Yeah. I just remind you of the poor folks who invested in places like Trump Tower, Tampa, or Trump Tower, Fort Lauderdale, or his Atlantic City casinos. What happened to all those poor folks? They lost their money. Did Trump lose anything?
He's also been bankrupt, like 6 times or something like that?
Yeah, and in no case did he actually suffer any real loss. Everyone else was left holding the bag. So there's no such thing. This is one of the greatest myths among so many others that Trump's followers have perpetrated about him. He is the most self-serving deal maker in history and the least successful deal maker in history when it comes to benefiting anyone but himself. So forget this misbegotten notion that this is part of the art of the deal. Moreover, go ahead.
What do you think made him? Do you think there was something specific that made him put this freeze on? Was it bonds?
It seems to be bonds, the collapse of the bond market, which is very important because when the bond market collapses and treasuries collapse, that means the government has to pay more to pay for the debt. And if you're going to have to pay more to pay for the debt, that constricts, if you care at all about the deficit and the deficit ceiling, that constricts what you can do in terms of big tax cuts, which further impact the deficit.
So you're saying your belief is that he saw the stock market crashing, he saw the issue with bonds, and he blinked, he panicked, and he took back his...
That is my presumption, obviously.
Somebody told me the other day, though, that none of his tariffs have been in effect for longer than 24 hours.
I think that's right.
So maybe there was some sort of pre-thought or pre-plan or strategy behind pulling them back within 24 hours.
Hard to, hard to say. Look, I just talked to someone yesterday. I'm not going to name the name, but you would know it if I name the name, someone who knows Trump as well as anyone. And he said, even during Trump's first term, there was some signs of cognitive decline. and that it's much worse now. Trump covers it up because he blusters. He talks loudly. But if you actually listen to what he says, you can see the signs of the cognitive decline. And he says Trump is really deeply into cognitive decline. And these ideas that this is part of some brilliant plan, that this is 3D chess when everybody else is playing two-dimensional checkers, just isn't the case. There isn't some grand, brilliant plan behind this.
I think even if there was a plan and there was a strategy, it's a dumb one. I mean, we've lost trillions of dollars in the market. We're now facing bond issues. So if he was some brilliant strategist, he would have probably figured out how to do all this without crashing the world economy.
You would think. And the worst impact, and this has really been underplayed, and we're going to show don't take just my word for it, we're going to show a video.
What?
Yes, of the small business person of the year in Minnesota talking about how what Trump has done already has the potential to destroy her small business and throw her into bankruptcy and having to release all of her employees. And moreover, again, don't just take my word for it. Look at the published analyses in places like Vox of independent economists. What they have said is the damage is already done. It's not like you can play some master stroke in the next days, weeks, or months that somehow is going to undo all the damage that's already been done to the American economy and particularly to small business persons. Let's play the video.
Before we do that, I just want to point out, too, that just because he paused the reciprocal tariffs, there's still a 10% base tariff on everybody. There's still a 25% automotive tariff. So he hasn't...
Well, you missed one.
What did I miss?
I think about 140% tariff
right.
on China.
On China as well. So even though he did freeze tariffs, he didn't freeze all the tariffs.
That's right.
And the 150, whatever, 40% is directly affecting this woman here.
Yes, and the 10%, it may seem like nothing, but it's multiple times higher than the average tariffs before Trump started messing with the tariffs. It's actually a very significant tariff. It's not nothing. You know, paying 10% more for your television, your iPhone, your computer, that's not nothing. That's going to cost average people a lot of money.
And the title of this video, Small Business Owner Says Tariff Pause was the, quote, final nail in the coffin.
What we're hearing from the administration is a celebration of the president's moves here. First the tariffs, and now describing the pause as kind of as a stroke of kind of strategic economic genius. We've seen investors seem to be breathing a sigh of relief. Are you breathing a sigh of relief?
I have products in China right now produced, ready to ship. They were supposed to get on a boat yesterday and come to America. And I can't ship them because what would have cost me maybe $30,000 with a reasonable tariff now is going to cost me almost $200,000. And I have to have that money when the products get to customs, and I don't have that, nothing close to that. It's not even reasonable. So I have to leave my goods in China until I figure out some other direction. But what that means is when I run out of stock in 2 to 3 months, I no longer have products to sell and no more revenue coming in, which means I can't pay.
I think a key point of what she's talking about is, you know, her business is operating now. She needs to stock in 2 to 3 months. You know, Donald Trump and his plans, you know, they might take, even if he's 100% successful, they might take years to actually come into real action.
Yes, Casey Hunt did a segment on this. She had on Peter Navarro, the trade advisor, who Elon Musk called Peter Retardo. I mean, God, it's like these people are in middle school. And even middle school kids wouldn't resort to that kind of slur. At any rate, she had charts showing that it takes years to really negotiate major tariff deals. And sometimes after years, they don't even work. They break down. And so she asked Peter Navarro why this is going to be different. You know what his answer was?
I have no idea.
We'll do it on Trump time, which is going to be totally
What does that
different.
even mean? Yeah.
It means nothing. You know, if you look at all their justifications for their policies, they're empty. They give you slogans. They give you generalities. They gave you absolutely no reason why this would be such a major exception to the history of tariff negotiations, particularly when you got to deal with, I don't know how many, 90 countries or more.
And I heard a Democratic congressman yesterday saying that there's actually some bipartisan support for dealing with trade, specifically with China. And even Joe Biden put certain tariffs in terms of chips, but you have to be strategic about it. You have to be laser focused. His strategy of this just like pumping these insane tariffs on China are just going to hurt everyday people. They're not bipartisan because they're not strategic and they're not smart. Let's be honest. If they were smart, they wouldn't be taking down small business owners like this lady right here.
Exactly. I mean, she is in a bind. And I'm sure her situation is multiplied many, many times over. And kind of the lack of precision, the lack of discrimination in what you're doing is marked not only by the tariff policy, but by Elon Musk is doing. You know, taking that chainsaw to the federal government. He's not investigating waste and fraud and then in surgical maneuvers getting rid of waste and fraud. He's just using waste and fraud as a slogan to engage in wholesale cuts in the federal workforce. And of course, Trump's tariffs, as we explained last time, are based on totally bogus math. And I will add something as well that they don't take into consideration.
Do it.
He's only talking about trade in goods. You know what else we trade in?
Services.
Services. Over $1 trillion in services. I repeat that. Over $1 trillion in services. Things like consulting or financial management or education. And we have a substantial surplus, not a deficit when it comes to the export of services, something he doesn't take into account. And what is his antagonizing the rest of the world going to do to our ability to export services?
Probably not do well.
It's gonna drive a monkey wrench into it because they're not going to look elsewhere. Why would they want to do business at all with the United States when they're being punished by the Trump administration? Already we're seeing these nations looking elsewhere outside of the U.S. For relationships. Do you want to play the rest of her video, or you think we got enough of that?
I think we got the gist of it.
All right.
I think we got the gist of it.
I want to make one other point. Again, as she illustrates, the damage is done. Yeah, maybe over time you can mitigate it, but you can never entirely repair the damages. And just check out the independent analyses that are all over the media. They all point out the damage is done. Moreover, they point out this notion of all of this manufacturing coming back to the United States is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Moreover, the fact that we have a negative balance of trade with certain countries is not necessarily bad. That means they're selling us cheap goods. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment when it comes to the notion that somehow we can replace factories in Vietnam with factories in the U.S. There's an excellent analysis I'd recommend to you, published today by Vox. And it points out 4 reasons why Trump's strategy that manufacturing business is suddenly going to bloom in the United States is a pipe dream. Aside from the fact that even if you didn't have all these barriers that I'm going to talk about in a moment, even if the path was clear, what are experts saying, Sam, about how long it would take?
4 to 5 years,
at least, at a minimum,
to get factories
to get the factories up and going, and yes, at least, and that presumes no barriers. Well, here are the barriers. Number 1, the supply chain problem. We've talked about that a lot. There's a reason why we have a global economy. Supply chains are globally interconnected. For example, the American auto industry very much depends upon all kinds of parts in the supply chain from abroad. Even Senator Cruz, believe it or not,
what?
You can get this. Senator Cruz, the Republican from Texas, a Trump loyalist, said, he talked to car companies and they told him that tariffs on their imported parts, and I'm quoting here, might actually hurt them more than foreign car companies hit with a singular tariff on U.S. car sales. So this notion that somehow, the domestic manufacturers are going to benefit is contradicted by these international supply chains. Secondly, the workforce problem. We've talked about this. Who is supposed to work in these factories cheaply enough to compete with foreign manufacturers? I think the only folks that might be willing to do that is what group, Sam?
Undocumented immigrants.
Right,
maybe.
and what's happening with them?
They're throwing them all out.
Yeah, good luck in finding, a workforce. They've tried to get around this by saying robots are going to do the work.
Wait. What?
Yes, listen to this.
No. The way you said it. You said robots again. Why can't you say robots?
Robots.
It's not robots.
Robots.
No. Robots.
Robots.
There
we go. Robots are going to do the work. And then, of course, there's the whole, they point out number 3, the confidence problem. The worst thing businesses want is what, Sam? What really spooks them?
The unknown?
The unknown, the uncertainty. Businesses love predictability, along with productivity too, of course. And the incredible uncertainty that Trump has created mitigates against any kind of long-term planning on the part of business. What that means is, even if these other barriers didn't exist, even if you had the workers and you didn't have the supply chain issues, the fact that business can't plan with any certainty means that the time frame could be a lot longer than 4 to 5 years if it occurs at all. And then finally, the currency problem. A lot of the competitiveness of goods depends upon the strength of the dollar, right? And everything that Trump is doing is creating uncertainty about the dollar, as well as reducing the strength of the dollar. So there's a lot more here than meets the eye. I've really only touched the surface of the analyses by independent economists. This is not Democratic talking points that have pointed out about the disaster of what Trump is doing. And the markets are reflecting that, right? Despite the big rise a couple of days ago, since Trump began announcing and implementing tariffs, the stock market is still way down. And that not only affects rich investors, who else is affected by trillions of dollars of losses in the market, Sam?
I mean, most Americans are tied to the market in some sense.
Right, particularly for retirement.
Yeah, but
a lot of retirement plans are tied to the market.
Yeah.
I have a retirement plan. I've had one for 50 years. And originally I was tied to the market. But, as I got older, I moved it out of the market. But, a lot of people who may not be quite as old as me still have their retirement tied in the market.
And it's not 1979 anymore. Anybody can grab their iPhone, download Robinhood, and invest in the market. It's not like it was even 20 years ago.
That's right. It's much more of an egalitarian market than it had been 20 years ago.
Now, I want to bring up, there has been some buzz about possible insider trading issues. Now, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social right before his announcement of the freeze that this was a really good time to buy. He put DJT, which happened to be the stock code of his media company. There's also some buzz about some Congress people maybe doing some insider trading stuff before the announcement. Do you have any analysis on that, or is it too early to tell?
Well, certainly, his posting on a limited platform, right? Not everybody gets Truth Social, right? Mostly it's his followers, and he never signs it. So using the initials DJT, which, as you say, is the acronym for his Truth Social company, that went up 22% right after he made that announcement. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not sure that unto itself constitutes inside trading. It might. But there is also rumors, and I can't confirm them, so I'm not going to monger them, that maybe some Trump-favored congresspersons and others got even more of an advance warning of what was going on. And that surely, if that's true, and I have no way of checking it, that certainly would be illegal insider trading. The problem is, what are the chances that the Trump administration is going to investigate Trump and his allies for inside trading?
Yes. 0.
But, yeah, go ahead.
We have so much to talk about. We're already 20 minutes in. I just want to pose you the question that's in our title. So what now? What happens next? What does this mean for the global economy, for the U.S. economy, for your average person watching? Can you answer that? I don't even know.
I wish I could answer that. It means total uncertainty.
Right.
You know,
I think that's clear at this point.
And that's clear. And as I said, nothing is worse for business than uncertainty. You can't plan. You're not going to hire new people. You're not going to raise wages, under conditions of uncertainty. And worse yet, it means clogged supply chains, as we saw with this small businesswoman in Minnesota. Lots of American businesses, and I think it's also true of some of Ivanka Trump's businesses, depend upon goods from abroad. And if that's clogged, as we saw, particularly when you're a small business person, and the thing that distinguishes small business, from General Motors or Google or, Tesla, is they don't have vast stores of capital. As she said, she cannot afford either to pay some huge multiple of what she usually pays, or to forego the goods and still survive. She doesn't have the capital reserves like big corporations do. That's why this is so detrimental to small business.
And I think something you keep hearing Trump officials say is, we're here to save Main Street. We're here to save Main Street. Unfortunately, I don't think Main Street even exists anymore in America, and I don't think there's anything left to save. Now, contrarily, I do think small businesses are doing really well, especially online. Like, I'm pretty sure this woman's business was mostly an e-business, right?
I can't say.
I think for the most part, a lot of small businesses operate online.
But she had actual goods that she had to ship.
Of course, but so do e-businesses.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, this idea of, bringing back manufacturing and bringing back Main Street. It's like, I think American society has moved on. Small businesses now do most of their commerce online. I mean, Sears doesn't even exist anymore. These brick and mortar.
It's Amazon now, right?
Right. Well, yeah.
And that's all online.
That's an issue in and of itself.
That's another issue, but I get you.
I'm just saying that these actions by the Trump administration, as we've seen, are hurting small businesses in the rhetoric of saving Main Street, but I don't even think there's anything left to save.
I think that's right. We've talked about this before. The old brick and mortar economy is not coming back, and it has nothing to do with tariffs. It has everything to do with the march of technology. Remember, you've heard me quote this several times, what Donald Trump and his family said in that famous letter to Barack Obama in 2009, that the transition to the new economy, the new clean energy, renewable energy economy, would be essential for economic growth and prosperity. Now he's claiming, we're going to go back to the smokestack industries of the 1950s. Not going to happen.
Everybody's saying Sears still exists. All right, it exists, but not even close to the scale that it used to.
Right. And a lot of retail companies, have been really suffering.
Is there anything else you want to say about this tariff stuff, or should we move on?
I want to say one related thing, and then we'll move on. While there's no chance the Trump Department of Justice or the Securities Exchange Commission is going to investigate insider trading by Trump and his allies. But on the other hand, who are they going after? They're going after Krebs, who headed the Trump. These are Trump people who headed the Trump cybersecurity unit back in 2020. They're now putting him under investigation. Why are they investigating Krebs? Do you know?
Because they don't agree with that.
Because he told the truth.
Yeah.
He said this was a fair and secure election. something that Trump's own Justice Department verified. Remember, William Barr, about as loyal a Trumper as you can get, went on TV saying this notion of a stolen election was bullshit. Every election administrator in America, most of them Republicans, certified that this was a fair and secure election. Every independent investigation ratified that. Trump lost every single significant case challenging the election. Not just in front of Democratic-appointed judges, but in front of Republican-appointed judges and even judges appointed by Trump himself. So for telling the truth, this guy is now under criminal investigation. The other is a former Trump official named Taylor, who published an op-ed, I think an accurate one, critical of Trump. And simply for expressing his own opinion, Mr. Taylor is now under investigation by the Department of Justice. Remember, Trump claimed to be the champion of free speech. Well, we have never in the history of the country, and I've studied American politics from the founding to the present, have we ever seen a president so antithetical to free speech? He believes free speech only constitutes speech that supports him or speech that he agrees with. And that leads us to another case, the Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained and is slated for deportation. And the court said, what's the grounds? This guy's here legally, he's got a visa. Why are we deporting him? You've got to give us some reason. And today, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, came out with their reason. Did you see it?
I don't think so.
Typically empty. Did they cite any criminal activity on his part?
I doubt it.
Zero. They just came up with nebulous generalizations that because of his opinions supporting the Palestinians, which should be perfectly free to state. I don't agree with him, but so what? You know, as Voltaire once said, the great philosopher, you know, I may entirely disagree with everything you say, but I support 100% your right to say it.
You probably agree with him on some things.
Some things, but a lot of things, it doesn't matter.
Right, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's the whole point. I support 100% your right to say things. And they didn't cite any way in which he undermined the foreign policy or the national security of the United States. It's typical of the Trump administration. They give you these slogans to justify the most extreme policies, foreign policy interests, you know, voter fraud, gang affiliations, buzzwords, empty buzzwords with absolutely nothing behind them. And that brings me to this next point that the House just passed this draconian bill requiring you now, another show your papers bill, which I believe is contrary to federal law, that to register to vote, you have to establish proof of citizenship through limited documents. What's the problem with that, Sam?
Not everybody can do that.
Right. There are apparently maybe as many as 20 million Americans otherwise eligible to vote, U.S. citizens, who don't have any of those documents. Plus, there's a huge problem for married women, right? What happens with a lot of women when they get married?
They change their name.
They change their name. So the name on the birth certificate is not going to be the same as the name they have on their current identification. So they are making it much more difficult to vote for tens of millions of Americans on a false pretense. Is there a problem in America of non-citizens voting?
No.
No. There have been charges upon charges upon charges, places like Texas and Florida. And every time they're investigated, they're found to be bogus. Non-citizens don't vote. There may be some mistaken ones on the registration, but they don't vote for a simple reason. Who's going to risk 3 to 5 years in federal prison to cast a single vote in an election? There's just no proof behind it. And as I said, this has been tested already in places like Texas and Florida and found completely wanting.
Wasn't there also some House bill that passed rebuting judges who rule against Trump? I mean, that's also pretty draconian, don't you think?
It's terribly draconian. It's a little narrower than that. As I understand the bill, and again, I'm not a lawyer, it limits the ability of district court judges to issue broader injunctions beyond their jurisdiction, like they've done to deal with some of Trump's allegedly illegal firings and dismantlings and deportations. Well, do you remember the mifepristone cases? The morning after abortion pill?
I don't remember them, no.
Yeah. Well, the right to lifers judge shopped for a judge in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, because there's only one federal judge there who's one of the most conservative federal judges in America. And he issued nationwide injunction against the morning after pill. Were Republicans all up in arms over that?
No.
No, it's only when injunctions challenge Donald Trump that they suddenly care. I don't think either one of these bills is going anywhere because they have to get through the Senate. And because they're not reconciliation bills, as they call them, they require 60 votes to break a filibuster. And that's obviously not going to happen with only 53 Republicans, and not necessarily all 53 on board with both of these pieces of legislation. But what they might be able to get through is their new reconciliation bill, setting a framework. It's gone through the House for deep taxes and spending cuts. And once again, they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Another one of their buzzwords, waste and fraud, right?
Yeah.
And they claim, even though the tax cuts are going to raise the deficit by many trillions of dollars over 10 years, estimates of about $4 trillion, that's not chump change, they claim they can offset it with trillions of dollars in spending cuts. And they claim they can do it by waste and fraud. That's smoke and mirrors. There is very little waste and fraud in federal benefit programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. How much waste and fraud has, over 2 months now, Elon Musk actually identified?
I have no idea.
Virtually none, and things that he claimed either turned out to be totally false or greatly exaggerated, absolutely minimal. And the idea that you can save trillions on waste and fraud is another set of smoke and mirrors designed to fool you and me and the rest of the American people, as independent economists have pointed out. And this goes all the way back to the waste and fraud efforts of the Reagan administration. There's only one way to make deep cuts in federal spending, Sam, and it's not by targeting waste and fraud. And what's the only way you can make deep cuts in federal spending?
I don't know.
Cut programs.
Oh.
Like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
What about the defense budget?
Their budget framework calls for raising by $300 billion. So they're not going to find it in defense. They can't find it in payment of the debt. That's, as we saw, because of the problems in the bond market, that's likely to get worse. So you've got to go after the big spending programs, right? Which, if you leave out defense and debt servicing, are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and food stamps. Things that, over 100 million Americans depend upon. But does Elon Musk care about cuts in those programs, or Donald Trump?
No.
No, they're not on Medicare. They don't care about, they're not on Medicaid. They might be on Medicare, but so what? They have their own insurance and their own billions. None of this matters to them. But, if you want to talk about Main Street, this hits Main Street right where it hurts. And by Main Street, I mean ordinary Americans, not the billionaires.
There was some good news today.
Yes, there was.
Do you want to get into that now?
Yes.
The Supreme Court ruled that, let me make sure I get his name right.
Abrego Garcia. Yes.
A Maryland man who was mistakenly taken to El Salvador. The Supreme Court ruled today that they got to bring him back.
Yeah, and there's even more to the story. The DOJ official, I believe he was DOJ, but federal official, who said, yeah, we should never have deported him. It was an administrative error. You know what happened to him?
Fired.
Well, I think he got suspended, maybe, en route to being fired. But the equivalent, you can't tell the truth, in this administration. The only thing that matters is not truth, but conforming to the political and ideological goals of the administration. They had no basis whatsoever for sending this guy to this hellhole of a prison in El Salvador. They had no reason. They couldn't come up with any reasons. They couldn't even convince the very conservative Supreme Court, Sam.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said you've got to facilitate his return. Does that mean it's necessarily going to happen?
Well,
not necessarily.
I hope so.
We've seen before the Trump administration saying, yes, of course, we'll follow court orders.
Yeah, but not this. That hasn't been from the Supreme Court before.
This is true. This will be a real test.
Yes.
They may say we tried, but, El Salvador wouldn't cooperate. We couldn't get him released. Or worse yet, maybe he died in prison, which in that prison, is not that far-fetched.
Thank you, Philip H., for gifting 5 memberships.
Wow.
I also wanted to get your reaction to 2 RFK comments that either happened today or yesterday.
Oh, my God.
I can't quite remember. He said, quote, on the measles, we need to do better at treating kids who have this disease and not just saying the only answer is vaccination. He also said, I believe in the same press conference, quote, by September, or do you want to just take that one?
Let me take that one, because that's so outrageous. RFK Jr., throughout most of his adult life, has led, not just been an anti-vaxxer, but been the face of the anti-vax movement. And we talked about what happened in Samoa when his anti-vax quackery, took hold.
Quack, quack.
Something like more than 80 kids died of the measles. That would be, I forget the number, but hundreds of thousands of kids projected to the population of the United States. We have now seen a measles outbreak unprecedented since the introduction of the measles vaccine. And by the way, measles is not necessarily a deadly disease, although 2 kids have already died, but it's one of, if not the most contagious disease there is. I grew up before the measles vaccine.
What?
Yeah, believe it or not.
How old are you?
Don't ask.
Okay.
I think I grew up, before the invention of the automobile, but that's another story. We all got the measles. Every kid I knew got the measles. It just was that contagious. And so, RFK Jr. realizing he's in big trouble. We have this tremendous, unprecedented outbreak. We have kids dying, and overwhelmingly they're unvaccinated. So he says, I do think the best way to protect is to get vaccinated. But now he's already softening and backtracking on that. There is no cure for the measles, period. And the quack remedies that RFK Jr. is proposing and now talking about, to say, it's not just the vaccine, weakening support for the vaccine. The quack remedies that he's talking about, like dosing kids with cod liver oil, A, don't work at all, and B, have dangerous side effects such as liver problems. It is beyond belief that in the most scientifically advanced country in the history of the world, we have not just someone who's ignorant of science, and by the way, ignorant of the federal health programs that he's supposedly running, but that's not the story. Not just ignorant of science, but a purveyor of dangerous quack science.
And if you want to learn more about that, too, we had Renee DiResta on as a guest, and she has studied him a lot, so check out that episode if you haven't already seen it. He also said, quote, by September, we will know what has caused the autism, quote, epidemic, and we will be able to eliminate those exposures. I mean, that's also just a really strange quote. I mean, I don't think there is an autism epidemic. I think as we've gotten better at diagnosing and as more people have come forward, as the stigma has lowered, yes, rates have risen. But again, that's because of better diagnosis and more people being diagnosed.
Right. But even leaving that aside, scientists have been seriously studying autism for many years. The notion that this purveyor of quack science, who thinks cod liver oil is going to cure measles, is now in just a matter of a few months going to launch a major scientific effort sufficient to a degree of certainty discover the source of autism is beyond belief. If you believe that, Sam, we've got that big bridge ready to sell you.
Yeah, that's, I don't know.
It's just
both of those
it's about
quotes,
as outrageous as anything you could say about these poor kids suffering from autism, giving them this obvious false hope.
Yeah. Like you said, it seemed like maybe he was coming around to following the science more, and then these two quotes, it seems like he's back in the other direction again.
He just can't help himself.
Yeah, he gets the issue. He can't help himself. All right. Let's get the question.
We have housekeeping.
Yes, let's get the questions before we do that. I have some housekeeping. We have 1,600 people watching, Dad.
That's great.
But we only have 500 likes, so make sure if you're watching, you like the stream, please subscribe, click that notification bell. Members and donations get priority in questions. Please become a member today. All right.
Do we have our discount for my class up? I want to, push that again.
Oh, go
tonight.
ahead. Savannah can put that up right now.
So I am giving a course with the renowned 92nd Street Y in New York. It's online. It's just 4 lectures and discussions. You'll have a chance to talk to me. Many of you have said you want to hear more history. It's hard in the context of these shows, but these 4 lectures and discussions are entirely devoted to historical analysis of the pivotal elections in American history. If you want to know anything about American elections and how important they have been and how they affect our politics and our society today, I invite you to join in on these lectures and discussions, and the 92nd Street Y has very generously offered for our brilliant audience a 50% discount. Is that up?
It should be up in a minute.
Okay, it'll be up.
Yeah. We're up to almost 700. Oh, we just hit 700 likes. Keep pushing those likes, guys. It's free. Doesn't matter how bad the economy is. You can always like a video.
That's right.
Yes.
But we also appreciate memberships and donations.
Our first question is from Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi. Thank you so much for your donation. They say, given the growing resistance to the Donald Trump administration, do you think the declaration of martial law will trigger a civil war / armed revolution by ordinary citizens like 1776?
Wow. I've always said, and I'll stick to it, I don't expect an outright civil war. Armed resistance against the American military is just, a futile, deadly operation. But who knows if the military would obey Donald Trump. But that's why he's purging experienced, nonpartisan military commanders and replacing them with his own loyalists.
Did you just burp into the mic?
Probably.
Burpgate 2.0. No. Burpgate 2.0.
Oh, no. I thought you were the burper.
Now it's on you.
Oh, no. What am I going to do?
Cry.
Yeah, but none of them can really detect anything. But I do think, the possibility of declaring martial law is not out of the question. Basically, Trump, another one of his buzzwords to justify whatever he wants to do is national emergency. It wouldn't surprise me if right before the election he declares a national emergency and declares martial law to take control of the election. Because the way things are going now, Republicans are going to suffer a bloodbath in 2026. And I don't mean violent, I mean at the polls. Typically, the party holding the White House suffers big losses in midterm elections anyway, as we saw in 2008. 2018, 2014, 2010. But the way things are going, it could be even greater than usual. And I would not put it past Donald Trump to try to do something to stymie the 2026 elections. I hope to God that I'm wrong.
John Rogers and KS just donated 5 memberships each. Thank you guys so much.
That's awesome.
We appreciate that. All right, we're at 700 likes. Let's get to 1,000. Come on, guys. This is from our Discord member, Christopher. They say, do you think that given the Supreme Court's latest ruling on the unlawful detained migrants, that this may lead to Republicans breaking away from Trump?
I don't think so.
Nah.
You know, again, it's a very narrow ruling regarding one migrant about whom even the Trump administration admitted they had nothing on him. It was an administrative error. They've tried after the fact without a shred of evidence to claim, you know, this guy had gang ties or was part of MS-13. That was already looked into in 2019 when a court granted him legal status in the United States. So I wouldn't make too much of this. Again, it's not a broad-scale attack on the Trump administration's deportation policy. We really don't know yet, you know, what the direction over time, once these cases are all decided on the substance and not on the so-called rocket docket, you know, a quick decision, not on the substance, full substance of the issue.
And I think Republicans and their base are just going to take the sort of rhetoric of, yeah, maybe they made a mistake here and there. Not great, but they're getting illegal criminals out, and that's what matters. You know,
and that has resonance.
That's what I'm saying.
But the fact is, the great majority of those that they've detained or deported either have no criminal record or committed only minor traffic offenses. I have a whole op-ed on this that I published a month and a half ago or so in the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. I commend it to you.
The SFS? No, the SFSS.
Yes.
South Florida Sun. No. Okay.
South Florida Sun-Sentinel.
Okay.
SFSS.
You're right. This is from Rohit Singh. They say, Professor Lichtman, would you share your insights on the cuts to the National Endowment for the Humanities? Do you foresee any possible future for the humanities?
I certainly do see a future for the humanities. It may not be, at least in the short term, tied to the federal government, but there is still robust scholarship in the humanities. One of the good things about the humanities that's distinct from the sciences is those of us in the humanities, like historians, philosophers, experts in literature, sociology, we don't require a lot of equipment, right? We don't require big laboratories. So we don't necessarily need big grants from the federal government, that we can continue our scholarship, provided there isn't even more draconian coming down on scholarship than we've already seen from the Trump administration. The last thing this administration wants, not only is any voice of discontent, dissent like Taylor or Krebs, but any kind of critically thoughtful, historically accurate scholarship. That's why they've tried to impose their politically driven orthodoxy on the Smithsonian Institution, the keeper of our heritage, and on colleges and universities across America.
Member Ollie says, Trump asked SCOTUS to let him fire top agency officials yesterday. If that happens and Trump replaces Fed Chair Jay Powell with a loyalist, how devastating would that be to American assets and the U.S. dollar?
I think if we replace competence and loyalty to the country with incompetence and loyalty to Trump, it has the gravest implications for the American dollar and the American economy. Whatever your ideology, you want competent people steering and guiding the economy. And of course, it has much broader implications. As I've talked about many times, and I've cited the book Spin Dictators, the way modern dictators take hold is by controlling ideas and information.
Green Entertainment. Why do sometimes I slur over my words?
I don't know, and you're supposed to be young and sharp.
I know.
I can be excused.
Right. Green Entertainment says, quote, "Is it possible for Trump to replace the Secret Service for loyal members? They are our last chance if he doesn't want to leave office peacefully."
Absolutely he can. Obviously, if he tries to do that, the courts are going to step in. But we don't know what the Supreme Court might decide. They just issued a very favorable ruling about his firing of officials in congressionally established regulatory agencies. So, yes, I think, there is a real prospect that could happen. But again, like everything else that's going on, the watchword is uncertainty. We just don't know how all this is going to play out, but the implications could be very dire.
Well, Bonnie Miller with a $100 donation, they say,
thank you.
There is an article on Substack making a compelling connection between measles and nephritis.
Nephritis, kidney disease. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not. Many years ago, I was on a quiz show. I was, in fact, the big quiz show winner of 1981 on Wink Martindale's Tic-Tac-Doe. Wink was a great guy. I loved him, but he wasn't the sharpest guy. He always said to me, "I don't know how you can answer these questions. I can barely read them." Well, it took him a week to realize I wasn't that kind of doctor. I couldn't help him with his sore shoulder. So I'm not that kind of doctor. I can't give you expert commentary, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. Devastating viruses like measles can, of course, implicate other aspects of people's health.
What percentage growth in real GDP per capita does Trump need to meet for the long-term economic key to turn true? What number in real GDP per capita is the baseline?
I haven't calculated that because it is so early and we have no significant GDP numbers. But my recollection is it's got, it had great GDP under Biden, but also this is 2 years, so the very bad GDP under Trump has to be taken into account. So I would guess somewhere around 1.5%. But that's a guess. I haven't calculated it, and I won't for a while until we get some real numbers.
What do you consider a greater foreign policy failure? The war in Iraq or Trump's tariff war, which is still shaping but has already caused significant damage?
Well,
it's hard to...
I can't answer that because the tariff war is, days old?
The war in Iraq killed a lot of people.
Yeah, if you were to ask me right now, it's not a fair comparison, but clearly the war in Iraq was one of the greatest foreign policy blunders in American history. A war based on entirely fabricated premises that have cost American lives, but many, many more Iraqi lives.
Yeah. Professor, Trump keeps mentioning all of these law firms that he has at his disposal. Can you explain what he's talking about and why he keeps bringing it up?
Yeah, this is, I run out of adjectives. Reprehensible, horrible, awful, destructive, you name it. This is one of the awful things Trump has done. I would call it extortion. I think it's a crime to use the power of the federal government, his power as president, to extort law firms into taking cases favorable to him, that if they don't do it, he's going to do things like barring them from federal buildings. Why is that so important to a lawyer if you're barred from a federal building? What takes place in federal buildings, Sam, that lawyers care about?
Courtrooms and proceedings.
Yes, exactly. Trials,
yeah.
Proceedings of all kinds. I think it's extortion. I think it's crime, but that's just my opinion. And some law firms have caved in. Others have joined in a very massive lawsuit against it. I think it is blatant extortion and blatantly illegal. And these are private organizations that he's cracking down on. And he's doing the same thing with colleges and universities, extorting them, saying, unless you conform to my distorted political priorities, I'm going to withdraw hundreds of billions of dollars in federal grants from you.
Remember, Mark Schloss says, Opium War and Napoleonic Wars highlight how economic tensions and trade disputes can escalate into full-scale wars when intertwined with political and strategic interests.
I agree with that, by the way. I think that's a very smart comment.
Can you discuss your views regarding escalation tit-for-tat trade war with China and the risk of conflict over Taiwan?
Well, it's a very speculative question. I agree entirely with the basic premise of the interconnection between economic tensions and outright war. I'm certainly not predicting war with China over Taiwan, although I think it's possible. And certainly, I think the very smart audience member is onto something, that the economic tensions and economic conflicts could increase the chances of this breaking out into a war over Taiwan. China has wanted to take back Taiwan for a very long time. I'm not predicting war. I still think it's unlikely, but I do think this economic warfare does not bode well for peace in the region. But I'm not predicting that it's going to be war.
1,600 people watching, 894 likes. Guys, let's get to 1,000 likes on this stream. I know we can do it. This is from Discord member Atomical. Do you think aiding Africa for AIDS relief that started under Bush Jr. was something any possible president would have done back then?
Well, I can't speculate on what some other presidents might have done, but certainly, had John Kerry been elected or Al Gore, yeah, I think, the same kind of humanitarian policies would have been adopted. What President Trump, I just gave it away, abrogated that.
DJT.
Yeah. And, this program, many believe, was the crowning achievement of the George W. Bush administration, that it saved, we don't know, certainly millions and maybe tens of millions of lives, along with other humanitarian health-related programs in Africa. Now that's being gutted by Donald Trump, which is not only a humanitarian disaster. People are going to die. I think it was J.D. Vance who invoked some medieval precedent to justify this, that, those people in Africa are so remote from us that their lives don't count as much as lives of Americans. Just a horrific, awful kind of devaluation of human lives. But clearly they don't seem to care. And beyond the humanitarian implications of this, when we withdraw, who steps in?
Russia and China.
Correct.
That was my Trump impression.
It wasn't very good.
Okay.
But it's better than mine.
Let me hear yours.
No, you don't need to hear mine.
Why are you so far back there?
I don't know. I keep sliding.
Why do you keep sliding?
What is that song, Slip Sliding Away? I've been slip sliding away.
Right. Nathan Casey Grant with a $10 donation. They say, Professor, are credit unions under threat to lose their federal funding as Doge cuts happen and the possible taxation? This scares me as I'm a teller and love how we serve the community that banks don't.
Credit unions are a credit to the country. You're absolutely right. They fill a critically important role in our economy and do help a lot of people. And I thank you for participating in that. And, I'm not aware of any specific attack yet on credit unions. But when it comes to Trump, Sam, all bets are off.
Right. Professor Lichtman, if China and Japan, major holders of U.S. debt, sell off their holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, it could potentially lead to higher U.S. borrowing costs, potentially destabilizing the U.S. financial market and increasing the risk of inflation. It appears to me that maybe Trump didn't realize both China and Japan have more cards to play than he does.
You're absolutely right. Like so many of the things, believe it or not, this goes back to Richard Nixon when he stopped the conversion of payments into gold and let currencies free float. That essentially allowed the United States to print money and to have our debt financed by foreign countries like China, Japan, and the countries of the European Union. That's why so much of our debt is held abroad, with China and Japan holding significant treasury bonds. And there's no question that does give them leverage over the American economy, because, as the brilliant caller indicated, dumping these would be devastating to the economy. Fortunately, we are, to an extent, protected because it's not in their interests to crash the T-bills that they hold in such large regard. But certainly, it is leverage that they have that there's no indication that Trump has any awareness of this whatsoever. I can't prove that, but that's my impression.
Did you watch Bernie Sanders' town hall last night? If so, what'd you make of it?
I didn't. Maybe you did, Sam.
I've seen clips here and there. Look, Bernie always delivers. Whenever I watch him or see him, he's always delivering the goods.
I agree. I didn't see it, but I've seen a lot from Bernie. I said, I've got a lot of reservations about Sanders, but I really admire him for standing up in a way a lot of Democrats have not. Jasmine Crockett has, AOC has, but, we still need more of a groundswell of Democrats stepping up, and there is at least some indication that that's happening. When I talked about this in the last show, that while Trump is not moved by these demonstrators, it might help stiffen the backbone of Democrats.
All right, we've hit 10 p.m. Eastern.
3 more questions.
3 more?
I'm going strong tonight.
Wow. David Pakman, who you've been on his show.
I've been on his show. I'm an admirer.
He said today that Trump was trying to get Amazon to ban his book and other books from Helen Cox Richardson, Brian Tyler Cohen, and etc. Isn't this a clear violation of the First Amendment?
They've been violating the First Amendment left and right. A lot of it's in the states. There's been a lot of book banning in places like Florida and Texas. Now government libraries are wholesale banning books, as well as we've talked about so many times, restricting what teachers like myself can say, even what government officials can say, what law firms can do and say. So absolutely, this is a gross violation of the First Amendment. But again, it's going to require extensive, protracted litigation with an uncertain outcome.
$20 donation at the very end here from Zero. They say, how'd you get so brilliant, Professor? I'm grateful to the live, and every time I get the experience of this kind of meaningful community. So thank you to Zero for that.
Thank you, Zero. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I will say I want to emphasize the importance of dedicating yourself to searching for truth. That's what I've been doing for more than 50 years. I'm not always successful, but I'm always trying to be as accurate and truthful as possible. That's why a major reason why I'm such a critic of the Trump approach, because the Trump approach completely trashes truth in favor of truth is mutated into whatever it is that advances Trump's politics and his conservative orthodoxy. As the great philosopher, the late great Hannah Arendt once said, once you lose truth, everything else is lost.
We hit 1,000 likes, Dad. That's good.
Good. One more.
This is from Casper, Chicago. We think maybe Mike Casper. I don't think so, because we haven't heard.
Doesn't seem to be, but maybe a relative.
They say, I think the best way forward is to let the dog catch the car. The Republicans are in control of all 3 branches of government. Let's see what they got. Professor Lichtman, what do you think?
I don't think we have a choice.
Well, yeah, to some extent we don't have a choice.
They are in control of all 3 branches of government. We just saw the kind of baleful legislation coming out of the House on things like voting rights and the courts and the budget. They passed this awful budget resolution. So, we're going to have to let them run with it. And we don't really have a choice, but we can get out in the streets. We can support organizations that challenge them. We can vote. We can organize. And we ourselves can go to the court.
All right, with that, we will start to wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. The good news is the Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this. Savannah, if you wouldn't mind putting the link to that in the chat and pinning it. A couple of donations we didn't get to. Nikki Wan, Philip H., George Vojic, I Am Not a Cat, Bilal Nadim, Sharon Novak, Edmund Doyle, and Matt L. All right, Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
My final words to the people is don't lose hope. We at least had a glimmer of hope from the Supreme Court, which indicates Supreme Court might not just always be willing to bend down to what Donald Trump is doing. They did at least recognize the tragic error of deporting someone to the hellhole in El Salvador without cause. You know, that's maybe a small ray of sunshine cutting through the gloom. But, you know, we should appreciate every ray that we can get.
All right, with that, Lichtman Live wraps up for the night. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right in a few minutes. Say goodnight, Dad.
Good night and enjoy the post show.